Hello, and welcome to another episode of Unlocking the Writer Within. I am Coach Kochek, and I'm really excited that you are here. So, I decided to do this one live for a variety of reasons. Um, but one of the reasons is I didn't want to overthink this topic, and I didn't want to get in my head, that I just wanted to flow from my heart, flow from my experiences, and just share based on what I have learned about writing and what I have experienced with writing. And at the same time, I wanted it to be live because I wanted to feel engaged with other people. So even if there's not commenting or engagement, I just want to know that this is not just me staring at my screen talking to myself. So I want to talk about using how to use writing to process pain and trauma. And as I said in my description, I feel like it goes without saying that we're living in really unprecedented times for our generation. And over, I mean, and there's so many memes and so many jokes out there about the year 2020, but I guess the reason why it's so funny is because there's a lot of valid truth to it. It kind of feels like one hit after another. And a lot of times when we are going through traumatic experiences or things are happening in our lives that are disrupting our norm, it can impact us on all levels, physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. It can completely come to disrupt every area of our lives, which can be extremely exhausting. So, for me, one of the things that I have been thinking about lately is how do I use my gifts, the things that I have experienced in my life, and my voice to help those of you, and to be honest, to help myself through some times that are presenting considerable difficulty. And I decided to share what I know about writing and the power of writing and how you can use it as a tool to help you through difficulty. And this isn't necessarily for people that want to make a career with writing. It isn't for people who want to make money with writing. It's just for people who want to tap in to the power of writing. And a lot of what I'm going to be talking about today is very personal in the process of writing. And you've heard me say this before if you've been following me or watching my videos, that I don't view writing as just systems and techniques and processes and red pens and APA and MLA and reference pages and all the things that we were taught in academia, right? I think that there's a time and a place for it, but I feel like sometimes we've spent so much time being hammered with that lane of writing that some of us haven't even been able to tap into how powerful the process of writing really can be, especially during times of difficulty. I don't want I don't want to minimize or try to identify and describe what anybody else is going through. But one of the things that I know that is unique about trauma and that is unique about pain is that those are times that can be the most beneficial in your life because they are times when you are forced into deep reflection. Um, and there's one of two ways that you can respond. So, one way that you can respond is to push down the pain, push down feelings of discomfort, and just pretend like everything is normal, right? Because trauma and pain are uncomfortable. They're not great feelings, especially sometimes when the trauma and the pain is directed back towards you, which means that there's something about this trauma and pain that is causing you to look within, to look at the mirror of yourself. And that can be super uncomfortable for some of us. I know for me, it's super uncomfortable. And what becomes easier is for us to get on the defensive or to protect our emotions or to protect our intentions and to defend ourselves and to hold our ego. And all of those things are totally normal with the human condition. However, when you take that route, you lose the power that comes with the power that comes in personal transformation when you allow yourself to sit and to reflect and to analyze internally, what does this moment mean for me? What is this moment teaching me about me? I'm just going to give you a quick little backstory. I remember when, and those of you who know my story know that I grew up in a very strict, fundamentally religious environment. And I remember when I decided to leave that environment. And I want to be clear that a lot of times what happens is that we become attached to systems, right? There's certain systems that we grow up in, or certain beliefs that we have, that we start attaching to our very identity. So instead of believing that this church system was a part of me, I believed that this church system was me, that we were one and the same, that I wrapped up my everything that I was in this system. So when I decided to leave, it caused a lot of conflict, right? A lot of conflict with people I loved, and a lot of conflict, especially within my family. And when that trauma and that pain of that situation hit, I remember there was like a lot of arguments, right? Like one side trying to convince the other side that my way of living and my system is correct, and your way of living and your system is incorrect. And it was kind of like a back and forth. And I remember when I consistently felt like I was defending myself, that every time I was coming up against these other individuals who were still in the system that I still loved them, I remember coming up to them with like my dukes up, right? Because I'm ready to defend. I'm ready to tell you why you're wrong. And I'm ready to defend my place. And I remember those conversations got so exhausting, to the point that it created even larger wedges, specifically with my family, and specifically with my sister, who I do, y'all have probably seen, we do a podcast together called Just One More Cookie on Health. And, we're 15 months apart. We've been best friends for as long as I can remember. But during that time period, that wedge became so big that we stopped talking for like 3 months, because it was like every time I was in front of her, I'm like ready to go. I'll tell you why you're wrong, and I'll tell you why my system is right. And it became this back and forth. And when I took a pause from that relationship and I stepped back and I just assessed the life that I had built under this system, right? And the beliefs that I had carried, and how much I had lost my identity in this system, and that the system had determined how I treated others and how I treated myself. And I didn't even realize like how far I had veered from who I authentically was. And I remember when I started going to therapy and really backing away from my relationship with my sister, I started doing a lot of intrinsic work on myself. And I did a lot of writing, because what I realized is that for years, I had just been almost like a robot in that environment. And that environment was shifting who I really believed I was, how I treated other people, how I viewed the world, right? So when I started coming back to myself, it happened through a lot of writing, because I couldn't really articulate what I felt inside. So I used writing as a way to really start to clearly articulate who I was and what I was feeling, and how being in that system had shaped me in a way that I didn't like. But that's not an easy task to do, because once again, like I said at the beginning, it is easier to embrace ignorance, and it's easier to allow a system to create your identity, as opposed to waking up every day and looking into the mirror of who you authentically are. And sometimes within the discussion, especially the discussion that's going on with the world right now, There's a lot of conversations happening that are uncomfortable. And sometimes we shy away from those conversations, or sometimes we want to point the mirror of that conversation at so many other people in so many different groups. And not that I'm saying that we shouldn't, because that is a huge part of it. But I think one of the biggest areas of growth on a macro scale always starts on a micro scale, which is holding leaders accountable, holding the system accountable, assessing the system, but also putting the mirror back on yourself, right? And determining, who am I within this system? And have I lost myself within a system of beliefs? And I want to really talk about like being in touch with who you authentically are and how you authentically feel, because sometimes within systems we forget. We don't even know. We become so identified and attached to a system that we get our very beliefs and our very feelings from a system. I remember being so entrenched in the system of religion that I would say how I felt. So I remember when I first left and I said, I feel like I am not my authentic self. I feel like there's something more. And I remember one of my, who I thought was my friend, she said, that's not how you feel. You feel offended. And I remember pausing and thinking, wait, do I feel offended? Maybe she's right. I had lost the ability to even know how to personally feel, because I was always looking outside myself for people to tell me how to feel, tell me how to engage in this world, tell me who the good guys are, tell me who the bad guys are. And I feel like collectively, it's not just religion, collectively as a society, we've lost touch with what that internal voice is telling us. So I think one of the beautiful, most amazing parts that happens with trauma is the breakdown. Because what the breakdown does is it seeks to remove what you thought was real and what you held on so tightly to reveal truth. And the nature of truth, it's uncomfortable. Sometimes the nature of truth can be devastating. Like the nature of truth for me was it was a resounding cry that said, for 33 years, what you have built, you are no longer going to be living based on that. You have to rebuild. And it was like holding on to what I felt I needed to hold on to, and then getting rid of things that literally I had built a life around. And then owning up to, where did I give away my power? When did I tell someone it was okay for them to dictate who I was and what I believed? When was it okay for me to allow my mind to be manipulated by somebody else because I held them in a high regard, or because I was taught that that person knew more than me, right? So I think in the midst of trauma and in the midst of where we're at, I think the first thing that you can do when you're using writing to process pain is, number one, use writing to check in with yourself. And I'm going to go a little into depth with that. So there is like common niceties when we're out and about, right? And we see people and we say, how are you? We check in with people a lot, if you think about it. And sometimes we ask, how are you? Because it's just common when we're greeting people. And then sometimes we ask, how are you? Because it looks like there's something wrong with them. And then we ask, how are you? Because we genuinely care. But when is the last time that you looked at yourself in the mirror and said, Amy, how are you? And when you are checking in with yourself, this is a really powerful tool when it comes to writing. When you are checking in with yourself and asking yourself, how are you? You must ban the filler words. And when I say filler words, I mean you cannot say things like fine, okay, I'm I am, all the things that we say because we don't want anyone to probe. So for you, when you're checking in with yourself with writing, it's a time for you to really think about, how do I feel? Put a feeling word to it, and then follow up that question with why. Because a lot of times when we're checking in with ourselves, it's not just our feelings. The feelings are a symptom of something deeper, right? So I was in a conversation with a friend, and he was talking about how one of his friends was mad at him because she felt like he was ignoring her, that she had sent him a text and he didn't text her back. So she was mad at him because he was ignoring her. And he said, I didn't want to waste time on that emotion. Like, she was angry, it seemed pointless. I said, well, it sounds like you weren't hearing her. And he said, well, why? I said, because being mad it's a surface level emotion and it's valid, but it's a symptom for something deeper. So if I'm mad at you for ignoring me, the symptom underneath that is that I don't feel seen by you. I don't feel like I'm a priority. I feel like I'm in the background. And then I can connect it even deeper. Maybe in my life, I don't feel seen. Maybe I'm still dealing with areas in my life where people I loved felt like they ignored me. So there is a benefit of checking in with yourself every day to learn, because this is a learned behavior. Most of us weren't taught how to really deal with our emotions. We are just introducing that now within this generation. But if you were like me, in my home, like, we didn't have deep emotional conversations. You didn't go deep. If you were sad, okay, talk about it. You got one chance to talk about it, and then you need to get over it. You just need to push it down and keep it moving, because life needs to be lived and no one cares about your whining. And while I don't believe that you should be paralyzed by your emotions, I believe that the idea that feelings are not facts is totally false. Feelings are facts. They are factual symptoms that say, hey, this spot right here, you might want to explore this because it's something deeper, right? So I think it's important to check in with yourself. When's the last time that you checked in with yourself? And as you create a pattern of doing this in your life with just writing, then it becomes easier just to make it a general practice within your life. But writing has the ability to allow you to go deeper. So if I'm sad, and I'm saying, why am I sad? Well, I'm sad because I'm lonely. Well, why are you lonely? You can keep asking yourself these why questions to challenge you. Because sometimes we wait around so long for somebody to ask us, how am I really? It's like, man, I just wish someone would ask me the right question. Well, don't wait on somebody else. You ask yourself the right questions, and then use writing to flesh it out. Use writing to go deeper and deeper. And because writing is so personal with just you, it becomes this really intimate connecting time with you, right? It's like the difference between having a conversation with someone and they say, I'm fine, as opposed to having a conversation with someone, they say, I'm really grieving. And then they go in depth. That conversation has the opportunity to create a much deeper connection than if you're just having a conversation with someone and they're saying fine. So it creates even more opportunity for you to connect deeper to yourself. The second way that you can use writing to process pain and trauma is write to encourage. I think we spend so much time being able to identify what we don't like. It's really easy, right? Like, if I think of my close relationships, like, you can pinpoint pretty quickly what irritates you, what you don't like about the world, what you don't like about people, what you don't like about your job. And I think sometimes we spend our time in that, right? Like, really being able to identify the negative. But when you learn how to write to encourage, and the first thing that you do is write to encourage yourself, because we are our greatest critics, right? And sometimes during pain and trauma, we're not operating at our highest level, and we beat ourselves up, right? It's like, last week, I remember it's around the time where it's my dad's anniversary of his death. He's been gone for almost 2 years now. And this time of year is just weird. And if you've ever grieved a parent or just somebody very close, you understand, like, grief is not linear. It's unpredictable. And there were a couple days where I just laid in the bed. Like I felt like I couldn't function, and I beat myself up. And I just thought, what's wrong with you? You're not being productive and you need to be doing this, without realizing that sometimes heavy emotions require rest. And instead of beating yourself up, sometimes you need to encourage yourself. Encourage yourself with kind words about how it's okay for you to feel, how you're proud of yourself for allowing yourself to feel, how you're honoring yourself. Even encouraging yourself right now in the midst of what's going on in the world. What are you doing that's working well for you? What are you doing that you could be proud of yourself? And then write to encourage others. I know for me, I go to the Dollar Tree. I started this during quarantine because I would get really down sometimes. And I went to the Dollar Tree and I bought these like little blank cards, very simple. And I would just start writing random letters of encouragement to people I loved. And I would either know that somebody I loved was going through a difficult time, or I would just think, I think I'm going to send this person a note just because. And it wasn't a long note, and it wasn't super in depth. It was just, I'm just glad I know you. And like, you add so much value, and you're an important person, and you're doing wonderful things. Even knowing, like right now, knowing that collectively, and obviously to different degrees, but collectively, I think that this has touched so many people, the pain of this, and just coming off of being in quarantine and uncertainty and, watching numbers every day of people that are dying. Like, that just doesn't happen. Like, I think sometimes because we ingest so much and we're just used to going on autopilot, we don't realize how much just what we're seeing and what we're hearing is like literally being taken in by our physical and emotional body. So finding ways to release that, finding ways to ease that. And I find a lot of times when you take the time to encourage others, and that can be encouraging others through text message. I do that a lot. Like, sometimes I just feel like I just want to share some words of love with somebody. And like I said, words are powerful. So when you use writing to share words of love and encouragement, it then fills you with words of love and encouragement, and to remind you, even though we live in a world with just, man, some people are idiots. And you see some people say some really stupid stuff, and it can be very discouraging. Like, man, have we all gone crazy? But when you're writing to encourage, it reminds you that there's really good people in the world. And there's really good people in your world that you can honor, that you can encourage, who may be suffering in silence, sometimes just like you. So write to encourage. The third thing you can do is write to process trauma. When I was going to therapy, I did something called a trauma timeline. And from the trauma timeline, my therapist took my life into 5-year increments. And in the 5-year increments, I would write down areas in that 5-year increment of events that happened, both really bad and really great events. And then from the timeline, she had me start writing narratives, like actually write out that time period of my life. And what was so beautiful is when I was writing out that timeline, I ended up writing it as if I was writing it to myself at that age. And what I discovered in that is that there was a lot of pain from certain areas of my life that I hadn't resolved that were still holding on to me currently. And it was like going back in time to certain spaces, certain ages, and writing to myself or just writing it out. It was like a way for me to say, I will not allow this to be used as a block in my life, but I am identifying this as a resource. And it was funny because while I was doing it, it was this realization of how much the difficulty that I had been through, that I use so much of it in how I show up in the world. That a lot of the pain and the trauma that I have been through I have used it as fuel. I mean, it's the foundation of my business. It's the foundation of what I'm doing here and why I talk and why I present, because of trauma. So when you're going through to process trauma, sometimes we just see all of the pain and all of the discomfort. And that is the characteristic of trauma. It's not fun. It's not fun when you're going through it. And sometimes it's not fun when you're reflecting on it. It's uncomfortable, right? Which is why sometimes we choose to lean away from it. We choose to shove it down, not realizing it. But trauma is like your greatest classroom. And when trauma comes, it's like class is in session and it's time to learn and it's time to gain all this power and information for you to take on to the next phase of your life. But a lot of times we are absent from our classroom because it's uncomfortable. It's not fun. But when you are writing to process trauma and when you are choosing to go back to areas of your life that you found difficult and write through them and give yourself permission to feel them and give yourself permission to learn from them and give yourself permission to see how can I use this as a resource to grow, you'll be surprised at the way that you navigate through trauma. I was telling a friend today, I said, I really feel like trauma looks good on me because the more trauma that I go through, the more that I realize, though this is hard, and though this feels like I am literally being ripped apart, I know that on the other side of this, if I allow it, is something so great. Right. And we know it conceptually. I'm sure a lot of us can talk about the benefits of trauma and talk about the benefits of difficulty in our own lives. But when we're in it, sometimes it's like when you're surrounded by darkness, sometimes it's difficult to hope for light. When you can't see in front of you, sometimes it's difficult to have the faith that light will come. But I think especially now, when we're in the midst of something that is still continuing and sometimes still feels like we're waking up every morning and getting hits, right? It's like the moment you catch your breath, you wake up the next day and feel like you're suffocating again. And I think one way that we can remind ourselves that nothing lasts forever is going back to your own story and reminding yourself, this right here, it won't last forever. The pain won't last forever. But what comes on the other side of this is something so much greater. So I bear down, just like during childbirth, you bear down and endure the pain because you know that something's coming. You know that something is being birthed. The next thing is number 4, write to create action and visualize something better. I know that when you feel barren, right? When nothing is going your way, sometimes it's difficult to believe or to visualize something better because all we see is heartache and all we see is pain and all we see is repeated patterns. So there's 2 choices always. You always have 2 choices. The one choice is accept it and wallow in it. And just accept it as this is how it will always be. And you know what's so interesting about words and thoughts is that it will be, right? It's like the Henry Ford quote. If you think you can and you think you can and you think you can't, you're right. It doesn't, whatever path you choose, it becomes right for you. So if you believe, and I want to make sure that you're understanding, and I want to reiterate this, macro change is fueled by micro change. Long-lasting change starts here because here is where we impact the world, right? And sometimes we feel helpless because it's like, well, what am I supposed to be doing for the world, right? I remember there's that movie Miss Congeniality, and it was like, all of the people in the beauty pageant, like it was, what's one thing that you would want to happen, that you would want to do for this world? And everybody would say world peace. And it sounded stupid. And they presented it like, oh, that's so stupid, world peace, right? Because in our minds, we have negated it. We have thought it's impossible. Well, it is impossible if we believe it is impossible, right? But people who have made the greatest difference in the world are people who have taken something that everybody else says is impossible, and they have visualized it as possible. And it might not have come out in the exact way they want. And change, peace, it is a eternal process. I don't know that we'll ever get to a point and say, now we're at peace, and now we're at perfection, because that's a utopia. That's not the kind of world we live in. We're humans, right? And anytime humans are going to inhabit the world, there's going to be conflict. We just get to decide the level of conflict and how we move through it. So start on a personal level. What are actions that you want to take in your life right now that create change for you in your home, in your personal space, in your beliefs, in the way that you allow the system to impact you, whatever system you ascribe to, right? And I want you to know those systems aren't you. You aren't the system. You are you within an umbrella of the system, but don't lose your identity, and don't pull from beliefs and pull from others' opinions. Know what you believe in, why you believe it, and stand firm on it. But create action within yourself. And if you feel like the life that you are creating, you are discontent with, what does a better life look like for you? And get clear with it. One of my clients, she wrote a book. It's the sweetest, one of the best books that I've ever coached someone to write. It's called Once Upon a Dream. And her book was about living in a very unhappy marriage. And when she was in her 50s, she decided she was going to get a divorce. She was going to start her own business. She was going to start over. And it was risky because she had lived off of his income for almost her entire life. And she wrote this beautiful book. And I remember when she was getting ready to publish it, and she had just signed the divorce papers. And I was sitting across from her at a coffee shop, and she was crying. And she was like, I don't have any money. I don't even know where I'm going to go. She was like, I know that I need to leave him. She said, but I don't know anything else but this life. She didn't know anything else but being in a mentally and emotionally abusive relationship. Like she knew she wanted something better, but she couldn't see it because she was in the thick of it. So I told her, I said, take your mind there before your body goes there. And I said, get out a sheet of paper, and I want you to write out, and in a narrative, what does your life look like on the other side of this? What do you want to create? What kind of home do you want to live in? I said, write the story, because you get to write your story. Take your brain there first, because our mind is what is going to control our physical bodies. So create the life that you want. Create action through what you want. So I encourage you to use writing to visualize on a micro level. What do you want your life to look like? Your relationships, your career, all of it. And then on a macro level, what do you want to see? Like, what do we want to see as people? Like, it's easy to say what we don't want. And it's valid and it's needed. Let's say it and let's proclaim it. We're done. We don't want this. But on the other side of it, what do we want? And let's get clear and let's write that narrative, because then we're giving ourselves marching orders for how to live it. Because if all we're saying is what we don't want, then we continue to attract what we don't want. If I sit here all day long and talk about the type of romantic relationship I don't want, I keep attracting that same type of person into my life. That's how powerful words are. So when I realized that the shift comes with just being so clear with what do I want? What does the narrative of my life look like? And you start to live differently. You start to attract differently. So that's number 4, right? To create action and visualize something better, first for yourself, for your family, for your micro, because that has a huge impact on the macro. And then talk about from a world perspective, from a America perspective, whatever country that you live in, what does that look like? And how do you then, now when you know what that looks like, now you know what kind of action steps can I do in my home, at my work, at my, in my relationships to make that macro vision a reality. The 5th thing is Write to lawmakers and people in power. I think that we forget how powerful our voice is and how powerful the voice of one person is. It's sometimes it can feel overwhelming when you feel like you're the only one, or you don't really know what to do, or you feel like you're being manipulated and controlled. But it's so interesting that movements, really big movements, really start with the voice of one. And that one finds somebody else, and that somebody else finds somebody else. Ideas usually start in the heart of one person, and that one person shares it with somebody else, right? So you are more powerful than you can even imagine. And I feel like we've become so disconnected from our leaders, Well, once again, I take it back to growing up in religion. It was like the idea, and sometimes that's what we do in controlling systems, right? We create these leaders who seem untouchable, that we are the lowly ones and they are the leaders, and they have so much more knowledge and so much more wisdom, and whatever they say has to go, and we have to respect the position. And I agree that respect is important, but I also don't agree with unconditional respect. I believe in holding people accountable, and I do believe that the only thing that separates me from you is a title, and your title dictates that you are to make decisions that benefit society as a whole. So understanding your power and the power that you have by writing. I remember in my, I was taking a class in college, and it was on public policy. And I remember the final project was find something in your community that you feel needs to be fixed, research who you need to contact, and get it fixed. And I thought, what in the world? Like, what kind of project is this? And it like intimidated me, because I'm having to call like contracted construction companies, and I'm having to call like councilmen, and I'm having to call like government offices, and I'm feeling intimidated. And I remember I wrote up a proposal to fix a road that was like, I lived in Indiana, and there was a lot of back roads that were just straight up dangerous. And this one particular road, it was just, there was no lights on it, had all these potholes and everything. So I wrote this letter and I sent it to, government offices. I called. But the major thing that I did was write. And when it was all said and done, when the semester was over, they fixed the road. And I was like, so then I contacted the councilman who made the decision to put the funds to fix the road. And he ended up contacting me, and he was like, thank you so much for reaching out. That was an issue that needed to be resolved. And we didn't realize how much of an issue, but it was your letter that changed it. And I'm like, now I told everyone. I was like, go to that road. That was me. I was the one who got that road fixed, right? And it's something so simple, but it's something that I believe we forget how much power we really do have. And it can be used with our abilities, like our voices, right? So find out, who are the people making the decisions. And a lot of times we think it's the White House. It's actually your local government. What decisions are they making? What can you write to them to start changing some things? Because if there's one thing that this has alerted to us, is that there's a lot going on that we are totally unaware of. And staying informed and staying connected is important. The last thing that you can do to process pain and trauma is write to change. That sounds like so general. But I want you to understand this when it comes to writing. The beauty of writing for yourself and the beauty of writing to change from within is that there's no outline for it. There's no parameters. You don't have to worry about grammar. You don't have to worry about a red pen or somebody, coming in and marking it all up. But because words are so powerful, writing is like looking at your life through a mirror. It's like watching your life on the screen in front of you. One of the biggest decisions that I ever made started because I self-published a book, and I had no idea what I was doing. I'd never self-published a book. I had never wanted to write a book. That was never like on my list of things to do. But when I wrote the book, so much of the book was personal. It was personal stories that I had never shared with anybody and that I had hidden within myself. It was like hiding from myself. And I was writing, and as I was writing, it was like looking at my life from a different perspective. I had lived it. I had already lived it, but now I got to revisit my life and see it from a different age, a different lens. And it was like being able to analyze, like, who had I become, and more importantly, who did I want to become? And I think understanding that, creating a writing practice every single day, and like I said at the beginning, write to check in with yourself, but also share your story. Write to change by sharing your story first with yourself. Like, write about your story, write about your experiences, write about your pain, write about whatever it is. No story should be discredited. Every story is relevant to the person who has lived it, and it's relevant to the audience that needs to hear it. Not everybody's your audience, and that's okay. But write to share your story with yourself, to see the power of who you are, wrapped up in experiences and difficulty and triumphs and trauma. And then write to change your environment. Write to change your world. Write to change your following. Write. I think now more than ever, we need to hear each other's stories. And I think we need to approach our stories and approach other people's stories with the heart to understand before we are understood. Because a lot of times when we hear other people's stories, it's like we're waiting to respond, right? It's like, oh, I can't wait to give my response. Instead of just being in the moment and listening and trying to understand. So write, share your story, read other people's stories, engage with story, because story is really what connects us. Our writing our story is what connects us. It's the human condition that we're sharing about ourselves. So I want to encourage you. I hope that this helped at any level. I want to encourage you that this skill, writing, is not something that is essentially learned in any classroom. I believe that writing, the skill of writing, is so intricately connected to the skill of honesty and the skill of vulnerability, that really the power of writing is the power of honesty and the power of just using your words. Because like I said before, words are powerful. When I think about some of the greatest things written in our time, have been by thought leaders who were at really traumatic experiences. Like I think of Martin Luther King, who wrote Letters from a Birmingham Jail. And if you haven't read it, you should. Just some of the most powerful writing. And in the midst of a difficult, painful situation, releasing something that changed mindsets. Like, think about that. Think about the ability of words to change mindsets. But the mindset that changes first is yours. Your writing comes to heal you first, and then it goes out to heal others. So I hope that this has been encouraging for you. And I want to reiterate the importance of, you are the most important person in your life, which means make sure that you are taking care of yourself first. There is a world that is shifting and changing in a really traumatic way, but in a really beautiful way at the same time. And it can feel overwhelming. So all of these steps are turning you back towards making sure that you're okay. So that in the transition, you don't falter. In the transition, you don't get overwhelmed, or you miss this beautiful opportunity to transition as well. So that we can experience really great change. So thank you so much for joining me. Thank you for the comments. Thank you for joining me for another episode of Unlocking the Writer Within. My name is Coach Kochek. Have a wonderful week. I will see you next week on the next episode.